Ani Buzu, it's Jen Gaddy here. I have decided to choose the article Indigenous English and Standard Language Ideology Towards a Post-Colonial View of English in Teacher Education by Andrea Sturzuk, University of Regina. In this article, she explains it and then performs an experiment using 76 Saskatchewan teacher education students to see their ideologies about English and the English language and where they feel like what they feel about it, and in terms of colonialism and looking through in the English language in a post-colonial lens. So one of the things I really found interesting is that language is socially constructed, and a lot of the time we forget that we are actually part of the social construct that creates language. So we are the ones who decide what language is to be spoken, where, when, with whom, as educators and as teachers, administrators. So we're essentially the educational gatekeepers. And so in this article, Sturzuk is examining the standard language policies on Saskatchewan teacher educators going into the workplace. So they've just graduated from their associate teacher program, and this is their final course before moving in. So British imperialism imposed English in places where it had never been before. And as a result of this, we have many, many different dialects and many different kinds of language and different English. So this created a hybrid of English, which also created a hierarchy, because with the language varieties or Englishes, it created a hierarchy. And I love the fact that she uses the word Englishes versus dialect, because a dialect imposes a dichotomy, which is a false dichotomy, saying that one is proper and one is a dialect. It's in fact, we all speak dialects of a language. It's just that depends on the number of people that speak it and the time and the place and what's happening. So basically, whoever won and has the largest number of speakers, that becomes the standard version of English. So the study that she bases this on takes place in 2003, in 2006. She looks at two different studies. She looks at elementary schools, which is one of the places where English and our ideologies around English is formed. And then she looks at the second one, which is in universities and teacher pre-service education, where we as the teachers go out and teach English to the students. So we begin to see the world as status quo, normal, natural, and in doing so, forget that society is socially constructed, and we play a role in constructing it. So this is something we have to remember, because it's only through our choices and us allowing this to become the standard that it has become the standard. If we put up some stops or say no, then it becomes harder to roll over. The assumption that we're labeled as something is labeled as, sorry about that. Sorry, the assumption is that what we label as standard is better because of its high levels of uniformity, which is not necessarily the case. It just means that more people have selected it and more people have bought in and are doing it. This is typically, as a result, Canada is founded on racial hierarchies, and this puts the different Englishes also in the same kind of hierarchies, with Indigenous English typically being at the bottom. Students should still learn formal English is very much expressed in this article. She never really says formal English, but I call it formal English because that's how I describe it to my students. It's not proper English, it's formal because it's used in formal versus a conversation. Biased language beliefs legitimize discriminating school practices. So students fail because they aren't using the right English, and they feel less intelligent. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers, especially in elementary, overly focus on phonetics versus higher level thinking skills such as comprehension. And this can also create negative effects on the student learning, such as self-esteem, patience, tolerance, and family issues, because the family gets frustrated because the student's not doing well. Student gets frustrated because they're not doing well, and then they go home, and then that's horrible. So it becomes a very unpleasant cycle. Many Saskatchewan schools don't know how to bridge the differences in Englishes and literacies. This is a problem a lot of provinces have, especially ones where they were mostly a homogeneous population, and then now they've had to learn how to integrate different Englishes into it.
Blah blah vampire emergency blah.
Pre-service teachers were looked at for their emerging criticality towards language, how teacher education can disrupt
blah blah vampire emergency blah.
Disrupt prescriptivist views on language. And so she took 76 students in this study and put them into 3 sections. The recurring themes from the students after the study, and she did an amazing job of making sure that she didn't skew the results by knowing which students had agreed to participate and which ones had agreed not to. So it was all kept in a sealed envelope, and that was not open until after the course was over. So she wouldn't reward students who had agreed to participate versus others who hadn't. The 3 recurring themes, and what I found really interesting, and she also commented, was that all comments were made by white settler students. None of the Indigenous students chose to, respond to this, and nor did she choose to use them in the article. So the teachers that did respond, or the aspiring teachers, did respond that they had pretty standard views on Indigenous English, which is that it wasn't ideal and that it was seen as less than. They have concerns with English language variation and their future as teachers. And they also noted that quite a few of them were able to change their views by the end of the article, which I thought it was really interesting. So she labeled all of the students with letters. So I just have a couple quotes that I found interesting. Student A had a childhood where they were in a foster home, and their parents were the foster parents, and they had many Indigenous children coming out of their home, and they viewed it as being forced to tolerate and learn Indigenous English because it wasn't the language they spoke. Student B said, as a Saskatchewan, it was very easy to believe that their language was right and all the other languages were wrong, or their English was right and all other were wrong. C made fun of Indigenous English speakers when they were a student and found this to be quite problematic. As they grew up, they didn't really realize that there were different Englishes. They was just, you didn't speak traditional Canadian English, so therefore your English was wrong. Student E did notice that did comment that Indigenous students were at a disadvantage due to their writing. Often they would receive their assignments back from their teachers with no real explanation as to why the assignment was wrong or what was wrong with it. It just had lots of red X's and circles, and I guess that's why we're not allowed to use red anymore, because your page ends up looking like it's been slaughtered and covered in blood. A and F students felt it was their responsibility to change and monitor their own negative assumptions, which sounds good. Overall, the researcher found that the course did have some changes in the way that students think, but she is unsure how long it will last. So the conclusions of the article were, how real are the changes? So, students, especially teachers, students, have a very vested interest in seeming to be good students and always being correct and agreeable. And so the researcher was unsure of how sustainable and realistic the changes were. Also, there is to take into account the hidden curriculum that informs views of language and is perpetuated through all of the literature and acceptance and things that we teach. Also, the colonial view of language is reinforced in the entry requirements to the Bachelor of Education, and the difficulties ESL students have in their practicum. Again, coming back to my dad, he was told that his Italian language was too thick, his accent was too thick, and that people couldn't understand him. One of the final conclusion that I agree with, and I think people in bigger cities have an advantage on this one, is that we now have a multi-dialectical competence, part of which entails an ability to understand new varieties of English. So, for instance, when I go to the store or shopping, I have no trouble understanding people with different varieties of Englishes, whereas some other people may have a lot of difficulty understanding different Englishes, depending on the thickness of the accent and a variety of other causes. So the takeaway is it is our job as teachers to try to find a midpoint and a way to stop perpetuating colonialism with the Englishes and value other Englishes while still teaching formal English writing, because English has become the business language of the world and students and people need to know how to use it correctly. Thank you.